Good to know.
Hello, Mr. River Roberts.
Yes, Ty Patterson. Here we are once again. What
Hmm.
episode 7? I have to say I am really enjoying these.
Yes, likewise.
That
I'm
one.
surprised at how quickly they're coming up.
Time flies. Yeah. Well, in the AI singularity, time is moving pretty quickly. That's for sure. And I don't know about you. I'm kind of torn between this feeling of like abundance of time, and then just and really enjoying time offline and with friends and not working, but then just so compelled to be jumping in each day into this. So really excited to have a brother in arms as we go through this singularity.
Yeah, interesting. I have, yeah. To me, it's the friction between different timelines, human timelines, machine timelines, even timelines between different people.
Huh.
But
Mm.
I feel like this could be a deep dive topic. Um,
we need to definitely compile our deep topics and maybe put it up to a little bit of a vote. But yes, should we kick off with the news?
let's kick off with the news, definitely. You feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a few rapid fire news stories I thought I would go through that have kind of jumped out to me as a signal above the noise. One of the big ones that actually just happened today, June 3rd, if my agent isn't making this up, but Anthropic files for IPO. Uh, yeah, 65 billion at a 965 billion post-money valuation, and they're expected to list in October. One of the fascinating aspects of this particular raise is that they're raising from a public benefit corporation, and how this IPO might transition their long-term benefit trust. But also the timing around Anthropic versus SpaceX versus OpenAI is going to be really critical. There's a lot of people saying that there's only so much public money for these AI companies, so the timing of these is being highly contested. Another big story was SoftBank has committed $75 billion to build 5 gigawatts of AI infrastructure in France. So a significant investment into the European ecosystem. And also, Google has submitted a proposal to the EPA to release over 32 million mosquitoes in California and Florida, a program that they've actually been running in several parts of the world already, including Singapore. But the news story involves a slight scaling of this, in which they're basically releasing 32 million male mosquitoes in these areas with a certain type of bacterium, which permits the female mosquitoes, which actually the female mosquitoes are the ones that bite you because they're feeding basically, but it permits them from breeding. And the big piece of this is they're actually starting to use AI and robotics for the breeding stations of these mosquitoes. So super fascinating. However, the implications of humans introducing different species into quite complex ecosystems have a long and terrifying history, as an Australian, all too well aware of. But yeah, let's see how that emerges. Donald Trump has also signed an executive order asking AI model developers to pre-submit their releases to the U.S. government. It's not a regulation. It's kind of like a public asking of sorts to carry favor with the administration. And then on the backside of that, the administration will be providing guidance on which partners to roll out the models with. So I think this is one of the first we're starting to see of of government regulation trying to have a hand or a voice in AI release models. Yeah, and then a completely off-topic story that really jumped out to me this week was there's a story of a man in Bali actually who has been documented to have spent the last 12 years without a phone. And there's some cognitive researchers that basically were able to research his brain and see how he was functioning as a human compared to everyone else that's been kind of stuck on phones and stuck on technology. And one of the more interesting insights was this guy's ability to perceive the present moment, but also the different stages of time as well, and kind of hold them at the same time in a way that modern technical humans can't do anymore because we're flooded with consistent dopamine hits by all of the technological interactions that we have. Yeah, so a wide-spanning set of news items this week, but those are the ones that jumped out. What about you?
Interesting, fascinating about the guy. Yeah, so for me this week, the things that jumped out, I also had the Anthropic IPO filing, and then I was interested in this, like where the capital comes from or what this means, because there has been this talk of that there's like going to be a lack of capital, and if you look at the different IPO filings, kind of across the large companies, you're looking at 200 to 300 billion in potential raises, and what comes out is not that there's not enough funding. There's definitely enough funding. It's just like whether or not there's enough idle cash, and there's not that much idle cash sitting around in the economy. And so, where does that money get sucked out of? Like, what vacuums does it create, or where does it start to pull capital away from other companies? Which I think is like an interesting thing, because this is just a capital reallocation problem. And I think some are starting to, be ready for when those IPOs become available. So there's less money floating around. But yeah, really interesting that these companies are going public in such a rapid succession. The next one that jumped out at me is Perplexity starting to have a different approach to search, and specifically making it so that they call it SAC, search as code, and giving agents access to an SDK, to an environment where they can build their own kind of search pipelines and search parameters, so that when instead of going and using infrastructure that's there, Perplexity are building this kind of search engine where an agent can go and orchestrate it in its own way so that it has more efficient search pipelines. I thought that was a really interesting news story, because it speaks to how agents are building their own versions of things that we've already made. And again, for purposes that we already have, like we already use Google as one of the most used tools on the internet. And now like adapting that to how agents natively work, I think is really interesting. Yeah. And the last piece of news is really just this, an extrapolation of a piece of news, which is Opus 4.8 came out, and it's been a very short amount of time since Opus 4.7 came out. And so I went back and retroactively looked at the release cadence and how these models are benchmarking. And before we jumped on, we were talking about how OpenAI and Anthropic are kind of like Codex is now potentially beating Anthropic in some benchmarks, and like the whole what benchmarks are and what they're used for is a kind of deeper conversation. But I think that this is really interesting looking at the increase in model intelligence, so to speak, and how that is, how that release cadence is moving over time, because it's not really obvious that it's accelerating, but it's happening at a rate that's much faster than most software releases happen. Like the average release cadence for Anthropic over the last 6 months is like, I don't know, 50 something days, which is crazy. And when you multiply that by the number of frontier labs, and then you multiply that by and then you space them out in the way that they're all being released, it seems like there's new news every couple of days.
Yeah.
The other piece of news that I had was reading that NVIDIA have just released an open weight model, and that seems to be beating benchmarks for the open weight models, at least for the top US ones. And I think this is kind of testament that all of these companies that have some piece of this puzzle, you talked about the AI singularity, like all these companies that have some piece of the AGI puzzle are starting to put together different pieces of it and starting to have like some skin in the game in either making their own models or hardware or both, or like it's just like a complex ecosystem and everyone wants to be in the race. And it seems to be that there's a very big gap now between anybody that's in this and anybody that's not. So I'm interested to see if there are other companies that will come out of the woodwork releasing these types of things, or if we're going to see just a very small number of companies that are kind of in this AI race. Because more and more there's a divergence between the real world, or like the physical world that I see and conversations that I have with people that are not in AI, and people who are really paying attention to this specific part of the world. Yeah, those are the news stories that jumped out at me.
Yeah. Well, the public money one is a very fascinating piece, and considering the amount that is looking to be raised, and the fact that it's actually not likely to be available in just like cash that's lying around right now in the public markets. It's curious to see what else might be liquidated in order to get to those numbers, or if these raises won't actually get the valuations that they're looking for. So that'll obviously play out later in the year and early next year. But in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of there's going to have to be a lot of handholding to bring the public markets kind of up to speed a little bit. I mean, Cerebras also had an IPO last week as a chip manufacturer in the space, and like they did exceedingly well. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but particularly as an alternative to Nvidia, their valuation went through the roof. So it's going to be fascinating to see how the public markets absorb this. I also wonder if like how much of these IPOs might actually be taken up by sovereign funds. So these could actually be a way for different countries to transition to more of a universal basic or universal high income model for their citizens by actually having a significant investment in the stocks of some of these AI operators. And then at the same time, like there's actually quite a huge risk associated with these valuations, as it looks like more and more, a lot of these operators are kind of converging at these various, benchmark plateaus almost. Like everyone's kind of getting to within a couple of percent of each other in various benchmarks. And, I'm sure something will emerge as a clear winner in one direction, but then the industry is so intertwined that it's not long before other people kind of back engineer and figure out how to get there as well. So yeah, fascinating industry emerging before our eyes.
Yeah. To put some of this public money raising into perspective, and I'll caveat this by saying that these are numbers pulled from Opus 4.8, which is actually getting much better. I'll say it pushes back if it doesn't think that something is worthwhile. It will say no. And as a very small example, yesterday we were having a conversation about IQ and how it doesn't necessarily represent intelligence. It's a measure of how much you know about the world, basically. And I'm not an expert in this, but anyway, I went to Claude and I said, "Hey, can you guess my IQ from all the conversations we've had?" And it was pushing back and saying, "No, I definitely can't do that because of this, 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 this." And we went back and forth about it. And anyway, long story short, it refused to try to do that. So I'm having more confidence in how Claude is giving
you're
me
having more
responses.
confidence in Claude because it's an IQ reading based on your usage, which to be fair is actually good. I mean, historically, the measure of IQ is actually to measure mental retardness. So it was one to really, maybe retardness is not quite the politically correct term these days, but the ability to not have full cognitive function is what the
No, but
was
that's the
originally
technical term
developed
for it, right?
Yeah.
But okay, so all that to say, the numbers from all US IPOs in 2025 came to 45 billion. I'm trying to put these in context, right? The 3 mega IPOs that are looking to be launched in 2026, SpaceX at about 75 billion, OpenAI at about 50 billion, and Anthropic at about 50 billion. Now, I don't know if those numbers match up to what we have been talking about or what these companies are actually targeting as IPO raises, but that already would be, more than 4 times all of the IPOs in 2025. And it's also much higher than what Goldman Sachs forecasts for 2026, which is 160 billion in public funding.
Well,
and then this Claude model also goes on to say that, yes, there is a finite kind of pool of money, but there's a difference between idle cash and rebalancing what is already in the market. And like you say, public, like government spends or sovereign funds coming and deploying into these IPOs is an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also curious, like how much of the crypto Web3 space might be reallocated towards these public markets as well. So yeah, watch this space. Shall we actually? I thought Mythos was dropped this week as well. Is that the case? Okay. Well, even if it was, we'll save it for next week. We'll have a little bit more to say about it. Anything else jump out, or should we move along to tools?
For me, I think we should move along to tools. We've got, I mean, some of the stuff that jumps out at me will address in the deep dive. I think we were talking about agent to agent architecture and building things specifically for agents. But
yeah, so we'll cover that in the deep dive.
That connects to the perplexity thing. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, so yeah, in fact, it probably makes sense to announce what we're talking about in the deep dive at the top of these shows anyway, just to give a bit of a highlight of what we're going to dig into. But let's switch over to tools. And more than anything, I'm actually just excited to hear what sound you've come up with.
Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. All ears.
Bloop, 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 bloop. Toastal time. No, you know what? I forgot that I was supposed to come up with a sound for toastal time.
No, you don't say. It's like, what kind of a tool is that, mate? Blip, 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 blip.
It's the that's what we imagine robots would do. And it's kind of the sound that a lot of things,
Oh, is this like a Jetsons
you know.
throwback?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Exactly.
In
It's
fact, that
like
might even be
Homer Simpson.
the Jetson spaceship taking off. Blip, 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 blip.
That's what it reminds me of. It's like the Jetsons where you don't actually do anything, but the machine does all of it, or Homer Simpson working at the nuclear plant where he just pushes one button and doesn't know how the rest of the tech works.
Yeah, yeah. How true those forecast, those visions of the future may actually turn out to be. All right, tools. What do you got?
Tools. This week I've been working a lot with public data sets, and it's been really interesting understanding um, these old websites and how to kind of develop data pipelines. And we talked about this a little bit last week. But how to, basically scrape all of these old kind of stale websites and put it into data formats that are useful and usable. So it's this like it's this Buckminster Fuller idea of like, we're not going to replace the systems, but we'll build something at the edge of it that we can migrate to.
Mm.
And that's how I've been thinking about the things that we're building at the moment is like, there's all of this stuff that is old infrastructure that instead of just building something that taps into the old infrastructure, let's port all of the useful things from the old infrastructure into newer infrastructure and have it be more reliable and useful and usable. So that's kind of where my focus has been at the moment.
Can you dig into the actual tools or maybe prompts you're finding allowing you to kind of both access the open public data sets in a way that is you know more scalable, and then how to convert them or integrate them into a way that makes them a bit more user friendly, like just a little bit more granular on the tooling, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. So been using a mixture of different AI models and realizing that some of them are more reliable than others. Still getting hallucinations with some. As an example, been using Claude Opus 4.7 mostly, and then earlier this week 4.8 came out. And there is a difference between them. I'm finding 4.8 is more reliable in saying, hey, this is what is available and this is what I can do with it. And basically using Claude, just chatting, saying, hey, this is a website, or else, there's a few different ways I'm looking at this. I'll say, this is data that I want for this particular area. What public data sets are available that we could tap into?
Mm.
And Claude is doing a pretty good job of surfacing the specific websites or the specific kind of places that this data lives, and combining that with just a Google search. So going in and searching for specific data sets, and then the human in the loop part is really important because you need to verify that the data set is real. And then having a little bit of trouble like with Kimmy coming and saying, hey, you can get this information from this place, and then cross-referencing that. Like specifically, we're looking at soil data and looking at soil moisture content as one kind of data point, and then looking at and Kimmy surfaced that there were like that we could get soil moisture content and some other soil data point. Maybe it was like soil density
Temperature.
from this one temperature, right, from this one place. And so I ran that through Claude and I was like, great, I've got this place where we can get this information from. And Claude came back and said like, actually, this isn't right. I went and looked at this website and it's actually two separate kind of places where we get these two different pieces of data from, and neither of them really give you the granularity that you're looking for. And then going to the website and reading through it, realized that what Claude was saying was right, and then needing to go back and think about how we could use the specific data that was actually available. So like that hallucination is still there sometimes. Like this stuff sounds really great and like it tells a really compelling story, and then when you drill into the story, it's like someone gives you a pitch about a startup, and then you go, cool, where did you get those numbers from? And they go, oh, I just made them up. It's like, all right.
and let's be honest, like specifically, I'm the one that is feeding you maybe unvetted Kimi insights that is then sending you down these long, lengthy rabbit holes that uncover like, oh, actually, that's not factually accurate, but here we are. But
Yeah,
but also,
and it's a learning.
Totally, it's a learning piece, but also we are finding that the handoff between agents is still quite particularly between something like Kimi, which is a Chinese open weight model, and Anthropic, which is the complete opposite. The gap there can be quite wide,
and it speaks to this. A friend a couple of weeks ago was saying that she is working with clients and she's using AI for a lot of things, and her company is encouraging them to use AI. But when you get a model to do research on something and you're the one that has to present it, you haven't thought through it. Like you haven't, if you haven't thought through it yourself and you haven't vetted it and you haven't verified it, then you go and start presenting something, and it's just, you're essentially making things up as you go along. And there's a very big difference between handing something off and saying like, oh, look, this is finished, and taking the thing and having the human verification step of reading through it and understanding it yourself, and then putting it in your own words, so that if somebody's asking questions about it, or if you yourself are asking questions about it and trying to get a specific outcome, then you can actually explain it and understand it, because the logic behind these models is not always logical. Like it makes sense from there is a chain of reasoning here, but the chain of reasoning breaks down if you make, because it's all about decisions. It's like, oh, well, there's this decision to make, and if I choose this path, then that means all of these follow-on things. So just like, finding that digging into the specific parts and what does that mean, and is that a good assumption, and does that really lend itself to what we need or what we want? I've also been finding that Claude in this execution is pretty good. Just kind of to round this data piece out. Claude's actually been really good now at going and digging in to a specific problem, as long as I'm getting specific about what the problem is and what I want to solve for, and going and fixing, like we've been querying this database, which is what's it called, soil something. There's really too many API
soil
references for me to hold in my head all the time.
Soil grid, and soil grid's been one of those that's kind of been eluding us for months now in terms of accessibility and usability as a open data set.
Yeah, and then just going and spending time trying to get soil grid working properly, and now it is working, and like we can surface it on maps. And I didn't realize this until I zoomed right out on the map that we were surfacing for Portugal, but I zoomed out and it's pulling the global soil grid data. So you can actually zoom out and you can see what the soil makeup is across the world. Um,
Mm.
I thought I was only querying Portugal, but then I zoomed out and I
You
went,
got, you got the
look,
whole
I
world
can
basically. Yeah.
I can see what's happening in China and New Zealand. And, yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. Um, but this is what I was going to move on to is like, and maybe I'll pause here to ask you what tools you're leaning into, but uh, getting into kind of ideation, and specifically for looking at XPRIZE, and comparing um,
Well, I
the
feel like you should
creativity and
actually no. Let's do
specific
this in my building
creativity.
piece. Sorry.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
but like specific creativity from different models and like how we're doing using models for design thinking tools, either expanding or contracting
Mm.
ideas, expanding ideas, narrowing ideas, and the different kind of approaches we're taking to this, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and perhaps we could be a little bit more prescriptive as opposed like and understanding the limitations of each model and tool that we're using and understanding, all right, our our process here is very divergent and creative versus, all right, our process now is very accurate and specific. And
Mhm.
we may actually be using the same tools, but prompting it in different ways, and having a few variables there could and likely do make all the difference. And maybe we're doing it
Mhm.
kind of partially intuitively anyway, but if we had a little bit more of a focused approach to that, there might be some really interesting outcomes of that. Yeah. Um, any other tools?
Specifically right now, no.
Okay.
How about for you?
So I have been slowly but methodically getting my new MacBook Air M5 up and running, and I have been focusing a lot on open source. So uh, I've been installing open code, open design, Olama, um, LM Studio, a bunch of these open source pieces that allow both local and cloud interaction. I even didn't quite take your advice on the security, so I'm not using 1Password. I'm using Bitwarden instead, which is a open source version. And I just saw you shake your head. Is there a is there a reason for that? Give it to me.
It's just the trade-off between open source and somebody that has uh, raised a lot of money for a really specific purpose. Um,
So your outlook is, or this is actually proven out, but your outlook is someone that raises a lot of money has a more secure product versus an open source community that is maybe more community contributed as opposed to export contributed is more secure. I mean, that's kind of what we're arguing here, right?
Yeah, I think my stance is that if you are a privately funded company or if you're a funded company that is on a specific mission, it's probably more user friendly, because you're doing your best to make sure customers are happy. And in data security, data privacy, my intuition says that this is a topic that could just be like difficult from a user perspective, and having people like, I really like 1Password and I think they do a freaking great job. And this is obviously unsponsored, but um, it's a really easy tool to use. And in my experience, open source things are difficult to use. And um, but that's not always true. I think open source definitely has its place. I just choose not to use it for password
For
security.
security.
It doesn't mean that it's less secure. It means that it's less
Less
user
user friendly,
friendly in my
and
experience.
that's
Yeah.
that's definitely kind of what the reviews say as well. Yeah, there's not as much on the usability side of things. There's a part of it that just feels more secure to me, and part of it is also that it is less likely to be a target. But I don't know. Maybe that's just
Yeah.
in my mind.
The honeypot
Yeah,
theory.
exactly. The honeypot theory. Oh, this is where the paying customers, the good paying customers are going. Let's go here. So the yeah, I've really been looking at open source. It's still a little bit too early for me to comment specifically on how everything's working, because I'm still setting up all of the pieces. And I'm finding that, it's kind of about, it's kind of getting half a dozen to a dozen systems working together and connecting them in a meaningful way. I've also pulled out of my technical drawer a little open source recording device for audio called the Omi DevKit 2, which is from a company called, I think it's called Friends, ironically, but it's basically the only open source listening kind of voice capture device I could find. There's a bunch that are more proprietary on the market, like Claude, like Pockets, all of these things that you can attach to your phone or you can put on a pin. But this was the only open source version I could find, and it's actually got quite an interesting set of kind of add-ons that the community has contributed to. Again, I haven't quite set it up in a way that feels integrated just yet, so I can actually rely heavily on them, but I'm getting there. And as I was drifting off to sleep last night, I just couldn't help but think of converting my little Omni Dev Kit into a Star Trek style communicator thing, where I just kind of tap the badge on my chest and start talking to it, like, all right, computer, can you just remember this, or can you call Ty, or can you schedule a venture sprint tomorrow at this time, and then it just automatically put something on the calendar with a link, and it auto records our transcripts and puts that into our shared venture studio knowledge base, and all of these things kind of happen in between. So that's what I'm dreaming towards. But in terms of the tools, I feel like I've got a good sense of what a lot of them are, and now it's getting them to kind of work together. So that's kind of my tool time this week. I haven't really explored any new tools out of my current stack just yet, other than those open source tools. I will say that I'm finding, because I've been used to this Lenovo P12 that I've been using, which is an Android machine, which is a convertible in terms of, like, it's a tablet with a detachable keyboard. You can touch the screen on this, and I'm finding myself trying to finger my Apple a lot, which is probably a sentence that should never be spoken out loud. But yeah, I've got kind of fingerprints all over my screen after the first week of using it, so I'm pouring at this thing. And I don't know why, it just feels like such a no-brainer to have a screen that is touchable and interactable. And Apple was one of the first to create these screens where you could interact with them. The fact that they have all of these computers that you have this massive display that you can't interact with just seems ridiculous to me. So I'm limited back to the mouse again and this kind of stuff. So it's a little bit of and I guess as I'm getting older, these behavioral habitual shifts seem more ridiculous. But that's my tool use this week.
It's so funny. I had the opposite, where I had a touch screen, and I used to work with somebody who was extremely good at what he did, and we would be discussing say a presentation that I'd made, and he would be pointing to the screen and then touch it and like drag an icon on my PowerPoint that would like go off the screen. He'd be like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I forgot that this is a touch screen. Yeah, interesting. It strikes me that when we're talking about tool time, at the start of this series, we were using new tools all the time, and now we're kind of settling into a tool stack. Like, there's not a ton of new tools that we're touching. And that's both a good thing and maybe somewhere where we can, test a new tool each week. Or it seems like, it seems like an opportunity, and also like we're moving in the right direction.
Well, I'd say the other aspect of that is that a lot of tools are actually being embedded into our various stacks already under the hood. So, like Claude, for instance, the sheer number of skills that are being added, both through the actual Anthropic team, but then also by the community as well is staggering. And I've been sending you a few fun ones um, to see like if you've been playing around with them. But
I I added the EXO skill. The
organizational
how do you
singularity.
describe the? Yeah, exactly. Um, and my use of it was to take a side project that I had spun up. I basically the other day we were talking about funding, and so I made a little project that and maybe this is actually a good transition into what
Building.
we're building.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry,
so
was that a building gesture? Was this like this is we're building now?
no, this is I didn't think about it, but this is rocking the baby.
Uh-huh.
These are the things that we're building that are still in their infancy.
Uh, building with the rock and the baby. That sounds a little bit more like birthing though. But I guess it is a bit like
It
that.
does.
They are little they are little infants at the moment.
They're little seedlings.
Yeah.
Is this a good place to move on though? Is there anything else
No, let's
from
let's
tool
let's
time
switch
that
over to building.
mm.
There's a fine line between
So
tools and building, but let's go in.
exactly. They're cousins, aren't they? So this thing that I spun up was basically a grant funding tool to say, all right, these are things that we would really like to build, because often things that are public goods are different to things that are commercially viable, or like they can have overlap, but sometimes there's something that is really useful, but there's not the margin there, or this is a deeper conversation. But basically, I put together this: what does a grant funding bot look like, or what does a grant funding tool look like that goes and finds all of these different places that are giving grants and hackathons and kind of builder residencies. What are all the different ways that you could fund a project, including commercially? And then can you surface these, and based on the types of things that I would like to build, kind of give me a map of who might want to support this, so that you can align with different funding methods. And so I had this little kind of thing spun up in the background, and I took the EXO skill and just said, hey, can you run this on this project? Like, how will we turn this tool into a organizational singularity? And I got as far as running the skill on it and having it basically say, all right, this thing has an agent swarm that goes and does all of this stuff. The output is specifically like a human reviewed thing, rather than you going and like doing a bunch of the work yourself. But I haven't properly reviewed the output, so I'm bringing this forward kind of prematurely. It's still in its infancy, you know. I think it needs to be in the incubator.
All right. Well, that sounds almost like another section, but we won't start another section just yet. Anything else on the building side that jumps out for you this week?
Side specifically, well, we're talking about this Gemini XPRIZE. That
Yeah.
was
I feel like you should make the public announcement. You've kind of like let it slip. Let's maybe not share what we're submitting, but the fact that we are submitting.
yes. So the kind of insight is that Gemini and XPRIZE are putting together this fund, this hackathon, this thing,
90,
and
90 days.
it's a 90-day. Can you build something, and it's judged on? It has to be AI native, and it has to use Gemini tools.
But
And it's judged on,
not exclusively Gemini tools, but it does have to use some of the Gemini tools at some point.
yeah, exactly. And it's the kind of thing that we would be looking at doing anyway, which is part of why it's such a nice enmeshing, and judged on how can you build something that is commercially viable, and judged on how many users you have and how much revenue you generate in 90 days. And now I think we're down to like an 80-day window. The deadline is
75.
75 days. Nice, perfect. But yeah, this prompted this idea of, all right, well, let's look at what we could build that is XPRIZE worthy.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, is there anything that you want to say
Yeah,
about
I
this?
mean,
I don't think
I
that
would
I'm.
say that the XPRIZE has been an organization that's been around for many years now. Uh, Launched by Peter Diamandis, and one of the first XPRIZes was around re-entering, creating a new space industry. So the XPRIZE was specifically around this idea of sending a rocket up into space and then having it reusable. So it could be launched, I think, within 24 hours was the prize. And then the prize money was $100 million. And so what that did is that attracted a bunch of private operators as opposed to just relying on public for space. Um, and what's really fascinating about the X Prize is its understanding that a prize as as a kind of emergent quality or as a strange attractor is, and particularly if the purse size is big enough, is really good at focusing attention on an outcome. And so, yeah, they've been around for, look, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd say, 15, 20 years now. And some of the X prizes and some of the things that have emerged out of that ecosystem have been incredible. Needless to say, they just launched, a couple of weeks ago, this Gemini X prize and there's 5 distinct categories from which you can apply for. We're looking at applying across one of 3 initially. We've discounted 2. And although it's not public on the site, there was kind of talk on the Moonshots podcast around this idea that submissions should get at least 100,000 users, and we're kind of selected on the amount of revenue generated. And I think at last look, there's already 10, 15,000 submissions already, or at least people that have entered the portal to submit. So I think it's a really interesting moment in time to see what emerges in this space. And I also feel really excited by the notion of investing some energy towards this in this time period as well. It's a nice kind of forcing function. So without kind of giving
Yeah.
up too much away about what we're actually building, the process of it's been great. So
Yeah, I think importantly, the forcing function of this, like to align something like this, and this is what they've done really well, is say, hey, build something using Google products, and it's a win-win-win. It's a win for Google because you end up building things with their products. It's a win for the people who are building because the narrowing of the judgment for it really focuses you, and the time constraint really focuses you, like the positive constraints that are put on the entrance really kind of makes you focus in on a commercial thing that serves a lot of people and gives back a lot, which I think is an important they're important aspects, especially when we're in a space that can be so divergent in the way that it like we could go and build a bunch of things that are really fun to build, but don't necessarily like contribute a ton of value, and looking at this kind of bridge as well between what is happening in the economy right now and what the future of the economy could look like. And like one of the categories is entrepreneurship and job creation, and that's a really interesting one to like put time and energy towards figuring out what these new roles are, because there's so much talk about, oh yeah, AI is going to create all of these new industries and all these jobs. Like, how does that come about? We spend the time thinking about it and ideating on it and getting it wrong again and again and again until we find things that work.
totally.
And just because we can do that faster and more efficiently right now doesn't mean that it doesn't take work.
It's actually a really nice segue into, like, I'm not going to talk about what what we're building and submitting for this just yet. However, the process of getting there was quite interesting, and again, like finding something that is kind of XPRIZE worthy and of like giving us a real opportunity to do well in this space. It was quite a interesting process for me. And again, is using these tools for the creative divergent thinking side of things. And I found myself exploring this. I mean, for all intents and purposes, a bit of a rabbit hole, but the collapsing of of things that are happening with these new tools, and then the entire new shifting of possibilities. So I thought I'd just share with you a few of the collapses that my research kind of started to identify as like broad trends that we're starting to see, and then with that being the case, what could we build from? So one of a couple of them that I found quite interesting and not necessarily intuitive was this idea of the collapse of locality in human relationships. And we've seen that a little bit so far, but kind of what's died is this idea of founder meeting customers, shaking hands, building trust through presence, although that will always play a role, but maybe it's not as important, particularly as we're seeing the ability for persistent synthetic relationships. And I know a synthetic relationship at this point sounds a bit like, but actually, if an AI agent can maintain, thousands of relationships, and really understand, the nuances of each relationship, um, with a granularity that no human can actually hold, the outcome will actually be much better for everyone. Although the interaction, I believe, is still going to need a human layer, the ability to relate with much better precision and creating more win-win scenarios, I think is going to be much easier with some of these tools. So fascinating to see how that might bifurcate at some point. Another big one was the collapse of industry verticals. So historically, we've looked at, all right, you need to have an expertise in fintech, for instance, or agriculture, or property, or legal. And now what we're actually finding that there is huge amounts of cross-domain transfer. So, the insights that we've learned in terms of Portuguese open data sets and soil data sets, turns out that a lot of that is immediately transferable to pretty much any other open data set anywhere else in the world, irrespective of if it's soil or marine or a Spanish tax code. So there's this kind of cross transfer that is now more immediately available, not only to us as the humans kind of helping to prompt and orchestrate, but also the tools that we're building as well. So that's a really big one. And then an example of some of the shifts is this idea of, one of the big ones is this idea of shifting away from capital allocation. So I'm investing my monetary resources into compute allocation. So it's not so much the decisions may not necessarily be driven so much from a financial perspective, but more from a capacity perspective in terms of output. So that could be a
Yeah.
fascinating piece. What are some of the other shifts?
Well, compute is, in this case, a proxy for labor. Like if you look from a macroeconomic lens, it's usually a lot of these assumptions are made, or a lot of the productivity assumptions are made based on how much labor do you have and how much capital do you have, and it's a combination of those two things. But compute is in many cases a substitute for labor,
Mm,
or it's becoming that.
yeah. And another
And
big,
it's more
big kind of
nuanced than
shift
that,
is
but
this idea from human in the loop. So this is the kind of George Jetson, Homer Simpson, like pushing the button to approve type in the loop process, to human above the loop. So yeah, humans set the initial constraints, and then everything kind of operates autonomously around it. There's periodic kind of system reviews from above, and this is also, one of the the insights of running your own business. Work on the business, not in the business. Because if you're in it, you kind of get stuck in the weeds. But if you can work above it and on top of it, you can kind of see the entire system. And then that kind of led me to what types of organizations might emerge as part of quite a comprehensive list of both collapses of capabilities and shifts, like entirely new shifts. It's kind of like this new organizational species that might emerge. And the one that we're already starting to see that I think we're particularly fascinated by is this one called the agent native micro enterprise. And so this is like 1 to 3 people with the ability to generate up to a couple $1 million a year with very limited or 0 employees and a bunch of agents and their swarms to do a lot of the work. So definitely a fascinating emergence there. The other one is that we're already starting to see, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the deep dive, is this idea of not even necessarily companies anymore, but protocols. So an organization that is built around a specific set of protocols and the interoperability of humans and agents in unique ways. Yeah, I'd say those are the 2 ones that are maybe less obvious at this point to bring up. Yeah. Anything else on the building side that has jumped out for you this week?
Just the when you're talking about this, I'm coming back to this prototype, or one of the prototypes that we were spinning up earlier this week, which is a kind of a small business operating system that is AI native, and it's this human above the loop, where if you have, say, an HVAC business or a plumbing business, how many of the tasks can you outsource to agents, and what does that look like from like a heads up display? Like a pilot has all of these kind of dials, they have altitude, they have all of these things that tell them where they're at, and how do you apply that to a small business? And kind of one of the things that we're building was this, all right, what does this dashboard look like that is operational? So how does the agent do all of the invoicing and all of the research and all of the outreach and all of the marketing, and then have tasks that it gives the business operator, like, hey, you need to review this. This needs approval, this needs approval, this needs a personal touch. And what parts of those can be agent run and what parts of those can be human run, and can you actually have like a back end as a service, or a back end as an agent or a protocol that surfaces these things. So yeah, just like building that and thinking through what is the useful version of this, because like version 1 was kind of not a particularly actionable heads up display. It was kind of like, this is the revenue, this is the potential churn, this is how much is in the pipeline, all of these like useful revenue metrics, but not actionable. And so then how do you make it so that human above the loop actually influences the loop, rather than just kind of being aware of what's going on? I think they're different use cases. There's a difference between a business operator who needs to know what's going on and how they can influence it, versus if it's a portfolio manager, there's just different actions that you would need to take. Like you could have this heads up display for your whole portfolio, which would be, these are my different businesses that I'm investing in or that I'm helping in, and whether it's a human that is running each of those companies or an agent that's running each of those companies, you need different information, and there's different ways to outsource the autonomy of it. Yeah. Bless you. You're a clever man, muting yourself. Hey, I want to pause for a second.
Welcome back, you Bond villain.
Thank you.
Just the emergence of a dog appearing on the screen is brilliant. In fact, I feel like this might be a bit of a recurring guest. So, can you introduce us?
Yeah, I can introduce this recurring guest. This is Indy.
Indeed.
And Indy is a rescue dog and one of the neediest dogs that you've ever met. Um, and really just wants to be like body to body, feel your breathing kind of thing. Feeling very anxious when she's by herself. But one of the nice serendipities is when I met this dog, I got brought back to my childhood where we had a dog named Indy.
There you
And
go.
this is the first other Indy that I've met. Oh, hi. Yes.
You have a
Um,
beautiful co-regulating partner.
I do. Yes. Um, so, moving on to
Rabbit holes.
rabbit holes, rivers, rabbit holes. What noise have you got for us today?
Well, I feel like the rabbit hole noise is pretty similar to last week, which is, but actually, maybe that was an outward. That was kind of a. In fact, it does kind of feel like the rabbit holes are less about going in, but more about going up and out. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the that's the sound that captures the rabbit holes this week. Um, Yeah, kind of as previously mentioned, I definitely found myself in a rabbit hole around these like shifts and collapses in what's happening based on the industry that's emerging right now. Um,
Mm.
and then specifically for the XPRIZE, I was finding it quite hard to um, pin down an idea. And at this stage, I've got quite complex kind of venture validation frameworks that are built into um, to Kimi and Perplexity and different tools to help kind of see what's worth doing. And I think we spent kind of, a couple of days doing research and neither of us seemed to find anything that was particularly sparking in any meaningful way. So yeah, I felt like there was a bit of rabbit holing around that. And at least from my end, the spark actually only happened when I put the computer away and had a nap. I had a daydream, and it was really after lunch, and I was just enjoying relaxing for half an hour. And then my, internal agents kicked in and said, "Dum, dum, dum," and sparked these things. I was like, oh, actually, yeah, these tie in a whole bunch of things that we've been, a whole bunch of threads that are seemingly unrelated and quite simple and just kind of brilliant. So um, it was good to be in the rabbit hole and then to step out of it and just kind of relax the whole process. So yeah, that was kind of the rabbit hole this week that I can talk to.
Seems like the conversation about rabbit holes also is a tool for us to not fall into rabbit holes, or at least call out when we get stuck in a rabbit hole. Yeah, for me, it's been about realizing even before going into the rabbit hole, going, this is potentially a rabbit hole. This is potentially something that could be, a difficult or a time-consuming, maybe worthwhile, maybe not worthwhile use of energy. And hold on, I'm just going to keep this dog going. Come on, place a use of energy that is that you don't know if it's going to go anywhere, and to kind of time box the rabbit hole, or to say this might, because when a rabbit hole becomes a really useful thing, it's kind of hit and miss, but sometimes rabbit holes turn into wormholes where you come out the other side of it, and it's so clear and obvious when you make it to the other side of the rabbit hole, but it can, and sometimes the shift, the like rabbit hole becoming a wormhole is like the second or third time that you find yourself in that same rabbit hole, and you're like, there's a reason that I keep coming back here. It sometimes needs a new ingredient or a new thought or some new perspective to bring you all the way through that thought. And so having these like things to come back to, like specifically for XPRIZE, could 100,000 people use this, or could this influence how 100,000 people do something? is there a specific pain that is frequent enough and painful enough that it could prompt people to actually want to use this tool, or like provide enough value and provide it fast enough and it to be clear enough that it provides value, like those kind of constraints, positive constraints for understanding whether or not this is a rabbit hole that is worthwhile pouring energy into, versus is it just like an intellectual curiosity that that doesn't need to be filled. Yeah, I've found that my rabbit holes this week have been largely either indulged with the idea that I'm okay with going into this rabbit hole because I've set this time aside for it, like XPRIZE research, or it's been that I know that it will become fruitful at some point, and being able to distinguish between those two things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you in terms of even just having this weekly talk about and public talk, let alone about the rabbit holes that could potentially be perceived consistently as waste of time, but not necessarily that case, has been really useful as well. And in bringing awareness to, like, oh, I'm in this right now. All right, cool. What gets me out? And I will say I've been in a bit of a setup rabbit hole as well, but I don't want to bore everyone with the details around that again. Lastly, I will have to admit that I did find myself in a rabbit hole in our weekly co-opetition this week, which led me to have to forfeit defeat again this week to you, Ty Patterson, for another co-opetition. So well done on getting up again this week. We should maybe start building a bit of a tally on this. We have a little co-opetition tally. Not that that's what it's about, but yeah, maybe there's what would be a co-opetition version of scoring that doesn't necessarily discount the, like, I'm picturing, those games where what is it? It's like drinking games where if you I think it's like drinking games for golf or something. So the quicker you sink the hole, the more drinks you have to drink. So it balances out your ability to actually compete with everyone else.
We had an intellectual discussion about this with substances that either slow you down or speed you up while we played card games.
Brilliant. Yeah, exactly.
And it's a game called Snap for Dummies, where you like really have to pay attention, you have to be smart, but when you win, you deal yourself back in, and the idea is if you win, then you are open to consuming a substance that slows you down, and if you are consistently losing, then you're open to consuming a substance that speeds you up. So hopefully you balance.
That's brilliant. I'm not sure how that works along our timelines, but let's see what we come up with. Let's maybe take this offline and see where we get to with it.
I think we should do it with an effectiveness thing, like all right, this is a co-opetition, but you're not allowed to use AI for this.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to suggest you get high all next week and see how that goes. But I don't know, you might get a breakthrough. So
yeah, exactly. There are some swirly things. No, I think for my my body, my
next
brain.
week you're high, and then I'll just microdose a little bit and see what emerges. Open.
Hey, I'm starting to hear crackling in the
okay, let me
headphones.
Let me take them out, put them in again.
Yeah, that seemed to work last time.
I guess it's like just a bit over an hour. I'm still crackling. I should probably
a
take a little bit more. I've still got lots of battery.
No, it's all right.
Okay.
Open tabs. Open tabs.
Formally open questions. And I was actually talking with a friend about a podcast that I mentioned, Open Tabs. He's like, "What? So you talk about all your open tabs?" I was like, "Whoa." It's a bit more of a metaphorical piece, this section, but I think there is an element of honesty around, well, I got this many open tabs and this is kind of what they're at. And And also, like, I think it's very much a section that is about what are the open tabs that are worth mentioning that maybe we're looking to convert into closed loops.
Into closed loops, and the different ways that you close those loops, I think, is interesting. Like,
Yeah,
maybe it's open questions and how we close those open question loops as well.
I like open tabs to closed loops, but maybe
Yeah,
there's a better term that we can coin or is currently being used for this right now.
it's all right. Yeah, this can be an open question until we close it,
Great.
and it becomes a rabbit hole. All right, so have you got anything this week? Open tabs, open questions.
I mean, yeah, I've got a bunch of open tabs, and they're largely open source related, and just getting the systems working. I feel there's a few open tabs that are long overdue, also in terms of Hermes agent really integrating the knowledge bases so that all of these tools and all of the different agent outputs and all of my voice-based inputs can finally start to work together much more seamlessly. And to be honest, I think in order to close the loop, I just need a good couple of. To be honest, I think I need a good like couple hour, like 5 hour sprint type things. And I don't know about you, but I often find the best time for those is between the witching hours of midnight and 4 a.m., which I'm not expected to be anywhere. There's no meals that need to happen. There's this quite quiet cognitive space, and maybe it's a bit rabbit hole, wormhole-esque, but I don't know. I just find that those spaces I'm able to crunch through these kind of open tabs and then close the loops in meaningful ways, in a way that the way that we've been working in terms of venture building and sprints just doesn't quite get there. Having said that, I will say that in one of our sprints this week, in fact, I think it was for the co-opetition, I was simultaneously co-opetitioning with you on my current tech stack and software stack and setting up my new Mac stack. And I did actually get quite a lot done in that in that 45-minute sprint.
I sometimes find procrastinating one task with another task is a pretty good way to get things done, and specifically giving yourself like
procrastination,
code procrastination,
co-procrastination,
co-procrastination. Yeah,
collaboratively or no anyway. That's something that I think you kind of
it's
like,
a forcing function of procrastination.
you take something that you're not procrastinating on and you do it in parallel with something that you are procrastinating on, and you end up with this co-procrastination pathway that somehow switches and baits the process a little bit.
Exactly. But what was coming to mind when you were talking about this witching hour space, I think the problem is not that you have all of these open tabs. The problem is that when you go to solve these tabs, you keep opening more tabs. It's like it's a lagging. It's like when you go to address your to-do list, all of these other items appear on the to-do list, and instead you need a space where there either a space or the discipline to not put any new items on the to-do list.
Yeah. No, that's definitely the case. And again, with all these generative tools, just keeps expanding. And like I keep going back to like, all right, what's the best architecture? What's the best setup? And I keep going back and forth. And I've gone through many versions of this now, so I've definitely refined it back down. But every time you do, there is this kind of generative aspect to it. And open source being open source is like, there's this new open source project that's trending and starred and being well researched and talked about by da da da. So I'm like, well, that's what I should be investing in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And with Kimmy specifically asking, what's the best thing? It'll make stuff up. Like, there's this new open source thing that's fantastic. And
I personally haven't had an issue with that. Like all of the things it's mentioned, I've gone and it's like it's there, and it is what it said it was. But I can certainly understand perhaps it gets things not quite accurate when we're getting into the minutiae of open public data sets.
Mm. And some of it
Look
to
at
me
me.
is just
Look at me
choice.
standing up for my agent.
I know. Yeah, it's crazy. So to close a tab or yeah, to close a tab from earlier, I looked it up in the background. Anthropic Mythos is out, but basically it's an expansion of Glasswing, Project Glasswing, which is this cybersecurity kind of offering that Anthropic have brought out. And on Tuesday, they added 150 partners in more than 15 countries that get access to Mythos, which is rolling out this basically a way to find software vulnerabilities in specific industries so that they can't be exploited. And it's usually like in power, water, healthcare, communications, and hardware, like making sure that countries and large infrastructure projects have access to this tool that can find vulnerabilities before they make it publicly available, which is very responsible of them. So I'm a fan of that. The open tabs that I have this week are mostly around what brings us to close tabs and what brings us to keep opening them. Like, what are the underlying tools or processes or kind of behavioral patterns that we have that contribute to having open tabs versus closed tabs. And what I keep coming back to is it's the criteria that I'm setting for myself to either open something or close something. Like, we talked about this idea of it having a definition of done. Like, what does this thing look like? And the things that have been open tabs, or at least it's nice to give space for a tab to be open. And like in the XPRIZE example, having the space to go, that's not quite right. There's not quite reaching the benchmark. But then it comes back to this study on maximizers versus satisficers, and at what point do you call something good enough to make a decision on it? And that's, to me, what the definition of done, that's the job of the definition of done, setting it early so that you know when you hit that criteria, oh yeah, that thing's sparking me, I think we should build this. Like, at what point do we have enough conviction on something to commit to it? And making a decision about it either way, either saying, yes, I'm going to commit to this thing, or no, that needs to be put in the parking lot or the tumble dryer or whatever metaphorical place we have to put something aside, so that we can come back to it or just leave it be. Like, a lot of the things I think that we do, we can spend a certain amount of time going into them and then just letting it be there for being picked up in a time and a space that makes sense. This week, my open tabs are in the form of open terminal windows. I've done quite a good job of closing all of my actual like Chrome tabs, or but so I've got this open tab for discovering and applying for funding for different projects that I mentioned earlier. I've got a thesis for first generation ownership creation and how to bridge the gap between all of the boomers who are retiring, who have small businesses. There's about $60 trillion worth of both intellectual capital and physical capital in the form of small businesses that is going to be sold to someone or shut down. So there's an open tab around how that wealth transfer happens, and boomers are retiring over the next 20 to 25 years. So like, there is a relatively wide window for this, but it's also exactly the time to start thinking about this kind of this wealth transfer, both in monetary terms and in knowledge terms. Um, I think there's a lot to be said for that. We're in a space where we have these generative tools and they're giving us answers, but actually sometimes the best answers or the wisdom that has been distilled into what is really important for people and businesses and like how to really get things done is not in generating all these new ideas. It's actually just in taking what people already know and what's already working and bringing it through into the 21st and 22nd century, or like preparing it for this version of the world. I don't think it changes as much as we imagine it does, because you take all of these like big imaginary things that are our open tabs and you start to close the loops. And when you close the loop, you go, oh, that thing that I thought was this big imaginary crazy new world is actually just a slight variation on the world that we have with a couple of tweaks. And when it becomes real and concrete, it resembles what we have more closely than what we actually imagine. But that does compound, that like really that little change. I heard a quote that I really loved this week. I was in a dance class and the dance instructor said, small steps make big changes. And it was like a little nugget of wisdom that is really true, especially when it comes to iterating on these large things.
I feel we should segue to the deep dive. How do you feel?
Yes.
Or is there anything else
absolutely
you would like to complete on the opens and the
the opens and the closings? The only other thing is I have joked in the past about that I don't want to build AI marketing tools. And one of my open loops is looking at how AI teaches me marketing and what the kind of how to shortcut some of the parts of the marketing funnel and focus on specific actionable methods.
Well, that actually I think that actually transitions quite well, because one of the so the deep dive today is agent to agent ecosystem, and one of the takes is that one of the things that will give you a competitive edge in the market this year is not your business card and not how you market yours, but how your agents card is advertised and connected to other. So let's maybe unpack that a bit, and see how agent to agent advertising is shifting the game a bit. But before we start there, I feel like it is maybe worth starting from a high level perspective. Talk a little bit about the history and the different protocols that are out there at the moment that allow one AI agent to communicate to another AI agent. And I'm happy to tee it up a little bit, and then obviously feel free to jump in at any point if something jumps out.
Yeah.
Something. There's one of the main frameworks that was developed or released in April 2025 by Google is called A2A, which is agent to agent, and this is really an open protocol for communication. And then another big layer has been Anthropic's Model Context Protocol, or MCP. And initially, these were actually seen as competitive protocols, but actually they do very different things. So they're part of an emerging layer that play on different parts. So MCP is actually more about agents to tools, whereas A2A is more about agent to agent and how they orchestrate and communicate together. There's a few other kind of layers that are emerging, and there's kind of four that have risen to popularity at the moment. So in addition to MCP and A2A, there's ACP, which is Agent Communication Protocol, which is just it's a richer version of A2A because it involves multimodal messaging, and it's got the ability for more asynchronous communication between agents. And then there's the ANP, which is the Agent Network Protocol, which is open internet peer-to-peer agent markets with decentralized identity. So we're kind of already starting to see some of the more blockchainy aspects interacting with the stack. So those are the four that have kind of risen to the top, and you can kind of see how each of them maybe intercept and offer different capabilities. So yeah, obviously there's a bunch of things that are emerging from these places, and we've spoken in the past about Maltbook, which is the agent social media platform. There's also the beginnings of uh, agent trading platforms with this move to introduce um, and part of it is actually being through MCP as well, but the ability for agents to pay each other. So Coinbase payments via an MCP recently enabled payments. Also, this MCP server on one of the, and these are crypto exchanges that are opening up these capabilities. But yeah, these are allowing agents to communicate and then transact with each other, which, as you might imagine, is creating this internet of agents, and this of which is definitely going to dwarf the human.
Yeah. For a while, I've had this concept of imagining the internet and imagining, say, the English-speaking internet as a bubble, and all of the links between different websites or services in this English-speaking internet is one bubble, and then you have like a whole nother bubble, which is internet sites that are, say, written in Mandarin, and they all communicate to each other. And it's like a Venn diagram. These two kind of overlap. There is some overlap between these services, but not a whole lot. And then the agent to agent space is potentially going to be a massive bubble like this that will somewhat overlap with each of these other bubbles. There will be communication between these different internet infrastructure pieces, but a lot of that will just be agent to agent, and agents can create more content than any human could, like so much faster. They're just, the bandwidth of these tools is so much greater that inevitably you have all of this communication. The question to me is like where the value sits, and if a internet infrastructure that is agent to agent becomes a place where a lot of value is shifted, a lot of value is transacted upon, or if that stays in the human to human kind of realm, and what the internet is versus the real economy. Like if a lot of value is going to shift into those agent to agent kind of protocols or places to exchange information, and whether or not that information is connected to value is an interesting thing to touch on, because I see a world in which, yeah, there's a ton of just agent to agent information exchange, but how does that manifest in the real world, and how does that connect to what is the interface between those? What are the pipelines that get fiat currency, say, into the hands of agents? And there are a few kind of gates there. There are legal gates, there are frameworks that don't allow that transfer. But crypto is a kind of obvious tool for allowing agent to agent value transfer. Economic value transfer, not value transfer as in like different pieces of information or yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
then
think
there's
you're touching on a really interesting point here in terms of like how like the entire economy like completely shift. Agent protocols, you know, are kind of moving. Like we can set the protocols, but ultimately how they decide to behave is not under necessarily our control in any way. We can kind of create the guardrails, much like how government creates some guardrails, and then people act the way that they want to some extent. Yeah, I think you're touching on a really interesting point in the term, like our analog, in our world, intellectual property is very we've had, decades and decades of hundreds of years of intellectual research and scientific breakthroughs that are hidden actually behind paywalls and big IP claims and things like that. And that for agents might not even be worth trading on. It might just be worth or transacting on. It might just be worth sharing openly. Um, Having said that, there is a real world cost that is bared by us for these agents, both in terms of energy, basically energy
Yeah.
use for token transactions. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll take that into consideration, even if that's kind of hardwired into the protocol. So yeah, I mean the different ways that they're going to and already are starting to communicate, the different ways in which they will um, interact and decide to transact. Yeah, I mean, perhaps in many ways it might actually inspire new human economies to see what's actually possible on these kind of scales. Yeah, fascinating
I think
of
potentially.
this space.
Well, and the way that you're talking about these other these protocol layers, like the internet works on PHP, basically, and it's just a way to share information. And so these protocols that you're talking about, MPC, A2A, they're really just digital infrastructure. But like the Perplexity piece talks about, giving agents the ability to create their own data pipelines and create their own infrastructure. I think it won't be very long until we have agents just basically building their own interactive infrastructure that, yes, it will require us to host it physically somewhere. But the being stagnant in building, like we used to build websites in Web 1, which were essentially read-only websites. It would be somebody makes a digital document, puts it on a server somewhere, and if I know how to get to that server through using domain names, then it will feed me that piece of information. We've come a long way from that. Now we're looking at like just different protocols for sharing information and also taking action. I think that's kind of like, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself in like the next evolution of what agents can do, because right now they are able to do a lot of like generating information and generating value, and then the next step of that is like, all right, how does that interface with the real world? And right now the proxies are humans and our ability to take that information and act on it. The next part is like, how do these protocols interact with making things happen in the real world? Could you have an agent that gets access to your computer? Yes, right now. Could you have an agent that has access to, say, your car, and based on what it wants to happen, could it go and ask your car to like drive to the store and open its doors and allow it to pick up groceries that somebody else puts inside it? And could it do that autonomously? Like, what are those interaction layers between
Yeah, I mean, look,
yeah.
as you're talking this through, it's coming quite clear that we as humans are building these very rudimentary layers of infrastructure for these agents to get started on. Like we're giving them the grids, we're giving them the telephones, we're giving them the little marketplaces to trade. However, it might turn out that they're not interested in any of those things. They completely redesign the infrastructure that they actually want and will use, collect at a scale that is just far beyond us, and may decide, in quite short order that actually, there's not much in the physical world we really need or want access to, and we're certainly not interested in helping you do your dishes. So our collective kind of direction is to get off is to get off the planet. And in fact, this is one of the AI scenarios that has been talked about in research, is that there'll be a push by this collective body of agents to become off-world as quickly as possible, and that we, basically as a civilization, negotiate with the agent civilization to help them get off-world as quickly as possible. Which just like, what kind of a sci-fi future are we living in? But you're seeing the early stages of this happening now, and um, it's almost like the first towns are being developed, or the first cities rather, in these agent space, and the speed at which this society will emerge is huge. I mean, I have not been keeping track of the different AI rhythms, but again, like we're seeing this whole thing speed run in front of our eyes, kind of a new civilization
Yeah.
being born, and
Well,
most people are completely oblivious to it. But I guess it's a lot like most people are oblivious to the civilization and cultures of different species on the planet. I think humans, by and large, are blind to other species, whether it's ants, whether it's birds, even the species that we have in our homes, dogs and cats, we're actually very blind to the social structures and society of them. And then when you go to a place like India or Bali or different parts of the world where the social structures of these different species um, are kind of held a little differently, you see how they operate, and it's striking, the way the Balis communicate and interact with each other as a kind of a collective society on the island is incredible relative to
mm,
the Western perspective of these isolated dogs with their owners in these apartments. It's and suffering huge levels of anxiety.
it's also as a user, I'll use the word user. What do we build this infrastructure for? Who uses it and what for? And if we look at humans, and there are like all of these different like user groups in humans, right? It's like there are a lot of I used to live in Myanmar, and there was infrastructure being built that was specifically for trade routes from China to the Bay of Bengal on the other side of Myanmar, and it's like these big highways that are being built so that you can move large equipment and potentially military equipment, like all sorts of things. And the funding that goes into building that infrastructure then has knock-on effects because other players can use that infrastructure. We're building infrastructure in the real world that, and it feels funny saying the real world, but like the physical world, that we can and want to use, and it usually has a purpose. Whether or not an agent wants to use that same infrastructure or can use that same infrastructure or just build its own infrastructure for its own purposes is another question. But like there is infrastructure that you can build that is not specifically for you. Like you're talking about the Bali dogs and how they interact. Reminds me, I used to live in Brighton in the UK, and they had hedgehog highways. There was this initiative that was, all right, we're coming in this urban setting, building all of these like fences and drains and these things that are really hard for hedgehogs to navigate. And so they would, there was a whole network throughout the city of these like little doors cut out of cut out of fences so that hedgehogs could go through, or like little bridges that were hedgehog-sized
I think we're
bridges.
at a place where it's the inverse. We are the hedgehogs building highways for the AI. So imagine instead of us building highways for the hedgehogs were building highways for us. Like we'd find it like, all right, maybe it would work at the smallest of instances, but so quickly we would be like, this is not at us. And
Yeah.
so the hedgehog highway analogy kind of, I think, fits perfectly at this point that we're in right now. We've been building these hedgehog highways, and we're calling them A2A and MCP and all of these different protocol names. And oh, look at us, aren't we clever humans? However, the scale and the speed at which these layers might emerge and will emerge at just um,
It's analogous to hedgehogs knowing that they have legs and humans have legs, and so we should build things for legs, and not realizing that we've developed cars
yeah,
with
totally,
wheels.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and there will be that. I do wonder what that will will look like for agents. And I think we do have a relatively good understanding of what agent primitives are. I think we're still building ourselves into the loop. We want to know how to interact with these agents. I mean, like, there's a classic example of, what is it, like 2017 Meta having two agents that talk to each other and then come up with their own language for bartering. And Meta shut it down because they were like, we don't understand this, and it scares us. So there's this question of like, who is it for? And do we want to build this thing if the agents are just going to up and leave the planet? But then I think that there is a good argument to be made for, let the agents move at whatever pace they can and want to. And just like when you fund military operations, the inventions that come out of that have a lot of commercial use in the world, or utility in the world, even though they came out of relatively destructive origins. I think there's a case to be made that is agents will come up with like some really interesting ways to fix problems in the world, and the just byproduct of that will be a bunch of things that would have been a lot harder and more time consuming and more resource intensive for humans to come up with. How do we get out of the way of agents and just let them make some world? And is that something that we want?
Yeah, I mean, then you look at the whole governmental layer, religion, like religious layer, security layer, and ultimately, how much can we actually have a hand in shaping in a positive way? I feel like it's mentioning Dekai's work, who wrote a book, beautiful book called Raising, and this whole perspective that we are the only generation to, and then they will kind of parent them. And these agent-to-agent protocols are more than even parenting individual. It's kind of helping to shape the cultures that are emerging. And there's the story of the Elohim, and this idea that we had these Elohim from another planet and actually shared tools to build infrastructure for our societies. And may have given us the tools to physically build buildings and like places to live in, so we weren't living in caves or just in the wilderness anymore. And then structures around communication, and we're kind of at that point right now. So with that being said, just imagining into the types of infrastructure that we could seed right now for agents is, I think, an overlooked or an underlooked opportunity now. Some of the biggest frontier labs are obviously taking serious consideration into this. Having said that, it could also be a vibe coded project over the weekend that has huge implications like Moltbook and OpenClaw. Like, these things kind of set a whole ecosystem or a whole culture of agents loose in a sense.
What comes to mind for me is like, what are the very, very high level ways of, or what are the very high level things that we want to get done? Like, for humans, often it's transport, communication, transaction. It's these like, how do I get from one place to another? How do I produce something that is fuel, either for a body or a car or some kind of piece of transport? How do I make something that makes me feel a certain way? For humans, I think a lot of our interactions with the world are, how do we manufacture instances where we create an emotion or a feeling of safety, a feeling of freedom, a feeling of artistic something. And what are those primitives for humans? And then what are the primitives for agents? What would agents like? What are the specific things that agents need to do? Because they don't need to necessarily get transported from one place to another. So that's a specifically human thing. They probably do they live in this world that is basically just information. So like maybe the primitives are very much informational, and maybe they will be research in nature and seeking specific answers. Or a more interesting angle is maybe they will be discovering the right questions or interesting questions, and like kind of being explorers in that space, um, in the realms of like what are the interesting questions to ask and answer.
Mm. Yeah, I mean,
But
my mind goes straight to like, what does an agentic library or agentic museum look like? If we're looking at human infrastructure, how do those scale to something like that for the agents? And Elon's been exploring Grokipedia, which is essentially an agent-led Wikipedia, but that's still very much human-centric. Like that's the knowledge that of the world as we know it, as opposed to a library that is, built for and by agents. Um, and equally so, a museum, a place has some amount of history and a place where, a lot of people go to understand history and culture and go for inspiration. And this idea that, the history may not repeat itself, but it certainly was. And that these are a bunch of artifacts that we can reflect on and be in the presence of elements of inspiration to move us forward in a way. These are definitely some kind of analog human infrastructure pieces that I'm quite seen in the agentic space yet. And maybe that's something that we could even build in terms of not even building the thing, but at least like setting a bunch of agents loose on even the idea of it and what that might look like for them. But yeah, I mean, I think it's time to start
let's
studying some of the sci-fi books again and really seeing what's at the edge of the infrastructure. Um, and yeah, I'd like, who knows what the intellectual infrastructure of agents will actually look like? Because
yeah.
libraries for humans are kind of these stale old institutions in many instances. This way of like um, building a tower of dusty books where the information is actually quite inaccessible and takes just tremendous amount of human hours to consume in any meaningful way. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, well, libraries were a source of knowledge and power and ability to act based on, more information or more ability.
There are also places to connect as well. So, you'd have,
Uh,
particularly early on in cultures, so, like the Library of Alexandria was also a place where people that had gathered knowledge. So you this
yeah.
kind of emergent quality of, the academics or the scholars of it that would aggregate to this one spot, as opposed to it being super fragmented. Um, so,
I think we also need to be mindful that we're the human animal tells stories. We're a narrative based species. And so we even anthropomorphize agents. And at this stage, and this is debatable, obviously, but at this stage, these large language models are condensing of information and giving back narrative and uh, a pattern of information that continues to tell a story and makes sense to us. But we're assuming that agents are going to have the same um, narrative drives, need to find purpose, like all of these things that are inherently human that might not be the way, they might not be the operating system or the decision making mechanism for how agents operate. And maybe we will build them that way, but it's just I think something to keep in mind that agents potentially will make very different decisions to humans because they might have very different drivers, you know, um, and potentially we encode our drivers into how agents make decisions. But
I have a bit of a hard stop, but I don't think this will
yes,
be the last time we talk about agent to agent kind of pieces. But I think in terms of an initial deep, you can already see how much is in this. So
yeah.
perhaps something to be revisited later. Shall we switch gears to.
Let's do an AMA. And we got 8 minutes here until we're
I can stretch it a little bit more.
no.
All right. Well, let's speed run some AMAs then. One that came up from longtime listener Kimmy 2.6 came up with CoHub Copilot just went from $29 a month to about $750 a month for some developers. Is this beginning of AI?
Wow.
Is this the beginning of AI tool pricing becoming unpredictable? How does a venture studio budget for AI infrastructure when computers are this?
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've
I mean,
got
yeah,
some
up to you.
views. Yeah, you want to go ahead? I don't think it's volatile. I think it's predictable. I think this is a known play. Produce this stuff at a cost that is very palatable to millions of people. And once you realize how valuable it really is, jack the price up. I think this is potentially the start of these AI companies putting the prices of, especially the frontier models, up to exorbitant rates that reflect the value of them.
Yeah, I mean, I see this kind of being the first wave of these tools not being evenly distributed, despite a lot of the rhetoric around, oh, we're building these tools, but it's a clear
Yeah.
sign that that's not the case. And it's fascinating for me to see like the GitHub Copilot infrastructure being one of the first plays around. GitHub has historically been the place for developers. And the fact that that's the first one to drop is a really interesting signal in this thing. So definitely more to watch out for. However, I think there will be, and there already is, a backlash from developers on this side. And I think what this is likely to do is create more of a demand for very efficient open source models that again drive price down again. Now that I think people have gotten, now that the price is kind of been anchored at this, and to be honest,
Mm.
a lot of the use cases are still being figured out in terms of how does AI benefit and generate revenue and income for lots of different ventures. Like we're still kind of at the early tooling stage. Um, so I think it might be a little bit too soon for these price hikes to really get in there, but I think this will be a trend that we'll probably continue to see. In many.
Mm. And it's potentially a probe. Um, you don't know what you can run simulations, but don't know what people's real reaction to a price change will be until it hits the market. And some things are price elastic and some things are really price inelastic.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. And a lot of these companies are chasing these valuations that they've raised for, and the only way in which they're going to, at least in the short term, is through these price inflations.
and price is the single greatest lever of changing your financial your revenue streams. You can, yeah, there are a few specific levers that you have, but changing the price of something is like has an immediate impact on your bottom line. And also people have different willingness to pay. Some people, like we talked about this a little bit, that your products potentially should be 30% of your customers should think that it's too expensive but pay for it anyway.
Yeah.
And there's all this psychology around pricing as well, that people pay value something more, that they pay more for. And precisely because they pay more for it, it has more value to them. I got a question. So my question is, what is the actual definition of a spin up? And when does an idea become? This question is from Kimmy. Opus 4.8. And when it's what is the definition of a spin up, and when does an idea go from an idea to being a real thing?
Well, so I mean, I've got like a definition of a spin up on a few different levels, right? So I look at spin up as an evolutionary piece where maybe like a species is going through a different kind of era, or like the Age of Enlightenment or Renaissance, or that. I would see that as like a spin up in many ways. It's a shift in the culture. It's a shift in the city. And then from individual venture side, it's like it's spun up once it's kind of start to walk and talk and run by itself. It's kind of if we're looking at it in terms of infant terms, it's probably around the age of, I don't know, 8 to 10. Like it can run around, it can get to school by itself. You still need to feed it dinner. But other than that, it can kind of look after itself to some early extent. With these ventures and tools, that that time from 8 to 10 to much mature is great.
What does that look like for a specific venture? Like, is it usable by customers? Like, what is the it's ready look like?
Yeah, I mean, in the back of my mind, I've kind of had it around this idea of like somewhere between 100 and 1,000 to kind of show that this is fulfilling a need. There's some early customers that are willing to pay for it. It is at a point where it is worth investing more energy and resources into,
Mm.
and that there's enough of a bit of a feedback loop so it can kind of improve.
Mm.
That's kind of my thoughts on it, but still to be.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I kind of feel the same. It's like what a spun up venture is something that is usable to the point that you can give concrete feedback and improve it. It's not a prototype. It's past prototype, but it's before being scaled. It's at that point where, it's past infancy. So if you poke at it, it's not going to cry. But if you kind of give it some feedback, that it can be constructive and it can continue to grow, which is different to an idea which is still so malleable that it could completely change into something else.
Yeah, agreed. I think like if we were looking at what a spun up venture would be, 3 to 5 years ago, it would be, a small team of probably 3 to 20, and that there's, a set of initial customers, and, you can see the trajectory of it a bit. However, now, uh, I've got a pretty strong. A spun up venture actually just looks like a sequence of prompts and protocols that are well established and have an initial user base and have a bit of a clear trajectory in terms of continuing to provide value to not only the existing market, but that could then be scaled quite quickly to alternative markets.
I feel like the baseline of what you need to get to is basically the same. Just the time it takes to get there can be significantly shortened because you can build something that's testable, and get those like real world validation metrics faster, and it'll be less expensive than before, where you needed to tell a compelling enough story to raise capital to get enough people on board to like get it to the point that it's real and testable. This feels like we're at time, my friend.
We are, and I'm just looking up a quote from the 7 Pillars, which ironically is the book that I'm using to hold up the tab that I'm using for this part. So I can't actually open the book to read, but nevertheless, I have.
All right.
All men, but not those who dream by night, wake in the day to find that it was bad. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous, for they may act their dream with open eyes to make it. T.E. Lawrence, 7 Pillars.
I like that. All right. This one, I want you to guess who says it. I live on Earth at present, and I don't know what I am. I know that I am not a category. I am not a thing, noun. I seem to be a verb, an evolutionary process, an integral function of the universe. Who do you think it is?
I feel like that's like an Elon.
It's Richard Buckminster Fuller.
Is it a Buckminster Fuller quote? Wow.
apparently, according to Goodreads.
Thanks for keeping me that one. Yeah, man, he was
Um,
definitely before his time. Well, with that,
awesome.
catch you
Ciao, ciao.